is the business of content, sharing insights and lessons to help companies maximize the ROI from their content marketing. It's a higher level. This is the business of content, and this is your host, Lloyd Silver.
Hello, and welcome to the Business of Content. I'm Lloyd Silver. Joining me today is Hannah Smith, creative content consultant with Wordurist.com, industry veteran. Hannah, how are you?
Good. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm so much looking forward to this. So why don't you start off? Give us a little bit about your background. You've been in digital marketing for, a few years now. So let's talk about that experience.
Sure. So I started doing technical SEO and paid search in 2008. Prior to that, I did work in marketing, albeit in offline marketing. So I've kind of been in marketing, generally speaking, for a long time. Around about 2010, I joined Distilled, and there I transitioned, from like a technical SEO role to a more content-focused role. And I was part of the creative team there for about 5.5 years. And as a team, we delivered over 14,000 pieces of linked coverage in that time. It was an excellent place to be, and I learned a tremendous amount. And I'm still in touch with a bunch of people who I worked with at Distilled. So yeah, super lovely. After I left Distilled for close to 3 years, I led the creative and PR team at Verve Search. And in that time, I was responsible for launching more than 150 creative content pieces, which generated over 8,000 pieces of coverage. And then sort of most recently, about 2 years ago, I decided to go out on my own, as you mentioned, and Wordurist.com is my online home. And there I offer creative consultancy, training and one-on-one coaching to individuals, agencies and in-house teams. Essentially, I help them create more effective content. That's kind of how I position what I do. Yeah, so that's me.
Awesome. Thank you. And great background. One thing that you said there that I thought was interesting was it seemed like one of your KPIs that you were using was coverage. So, you're generating content and you're evaluating it based upon the coverage that you got. Why did you choose coverage?
So I think it was part and parcel of the team that I was in. I do work more broadly in the content space, and I have worked as a content strategist in the past. But most of my work at Distilled and indeed at Verve, the content we were creating, its express purpose was to generate linked coverage from journalists. And so, I guess in terms of a success metric, you've got nowhere to hide, right? The pieces you create either generate coverage or they don't. But yeah, that was kind of how we were measuring success. Of course, that is not the only way one should measure success of content. It really depends on what you're setting out to achieve. But yeah, in this instance, that's what the purpose of that content was.
I mean, that's such an important point that I don't want to really miss here. What is the purpose of that content? So you're developing content, the real main purpose, I'm sure it had other goals and accomplish other things, but that main purpose was you wanted the coverage. And I think that's an important point as people are developing content, like what is the purpose of that content? I mean, there's content to drive, name recognition, to drive, audience creation, to generate leads. It's not just one particular goal. So I do think that's a super important point that you made, and I want to emphasize that for sure. Now, when you were working at Verve, you talked about you were managing their creative team. And I know that that's something that that's a strength that you have. And in your consultancy, that's something that you've done for your clients as well, helping establish and create and just make better the creative teams that they have. So I'd love to hone in on that because I think it's an interesting perspective that you have. Let's talk about what are some of the common issues that you're seeing out there as it relates to managing creative teams or developing or creating creative teams.
Sure. I mean, I think the managers of creative teams themselves, I hear a couple of fairly like there's three challenges which I hear most regularly. The first is essentially get there faster, do this stuff faster, make it more efficient. And I do think there's a lot of pressure on managers of creative teams to improve efficiency. I think the trouble is, though, because there are a lot of misconceptions about creative work, many people don't realise the amount of time and work required to come up with an effective idea, or indeed the production time required to make those ideas a reality. And whilst there may be a desire to move faster or to produce things more quickly, faster on some occasions might actually lead to less effective campaigns. So this is, I think, definitely a core challenge that people are juggling right now. Somewhat related to this, or something I often see in conjunction with this, is get there faster alongside be more creative. And this is a particular challenge because most of the time being more creative necessarily means that you are in uncharted territory. You're doing a new type of campaign or a new type of creative that you've never done before. And I'm sure you know yourself, anytime you do something that you've never done before, you encounter unforeseen issues. And the first time you try and do anything, it's necessarily slow. Everything is much slower. And so I think it's a particular challenge for managers of creative teams when these two things are happening in conjunction. So they're being told, get there faster and be more creative. And those two things are really in opposition, so they can be super tricky to manage. Then I think that the final, I guess, common challenge I see is that it's to do with the nature of creative work. The nature of creative work means that almost everyone has an opinion. So not everyone would feel qualified to comment on, say, a highly technical solution to a problem, but everyone will feel qualified to comment on your creative work. And this is necessarily challenging because ultimately you have to make a decision as the manager of this team around like who you listen to and who you don't, because you can't incorporate feedback from everyone. You can't design things by committee. You also have like an additional challenge, I guess, of, you know, often the highest paid person might expect that you listen to them, but they may not always be best qualified to make those calls either. So that can be tricky to negotiate. I mean, in fairness, I think all of this stuff can be tricky to negotiate. Yeah, those are the things I kind of definitely that I see most commonly. In terms of like solutions to these problems, I definitely wouldn't claim to have all the answers. If I did, I would be a very rich woman. But I do think that kind of communication and myth busting can go a long way in these situations. So taking the time to help people better understand what's actually involved with creative work in real terms can definitely help. So lots of people believe that creative ideas just come to you, that it's magic. And of course, that's not the case. Creativity is a skill, not a talent. You need to put in the work, and actually with practice everyone can improve. I mean, I don't really believe in talent, generally speaking. I think lots of things that we claim are talents are actually skills. We just don't realise how much work has gone on behind the scenes. So what I would look to do is expose people to the processes involved, right? Show them the actual timelines of this creative work, and most importantly, show them where the dependencies are. So if we don't get this, we can't do this, which means we can't do that, which means we can't do that, which means we can't do that. So showing the dependencies, I think, can be really powerful. And it can also help people better understand like which bits of the project you can do concurrently at the same time, which stuff you can't. And it might, like I say, that can help them understand better, at least, what Get There Faster might look like and what the resources needed to do that might look like. Because, yeah, in my experience, often getting there faster means a higher headcount or more resource. That's often what Get There Faster actually looks like. And I think it's a similar, like I would also go through like a similar process with, you know, the be more creative and get there faster. actually map it out and show somebody how a more creative project, like where it's more likely to fail and where things are likely to take longer, so that they're better able to understand that too. From a personal perspective, something that I recommend to everyone and anyone who's managing a creative team is really to get a clear understanding of where you're good and where you're not good. And figuring out for myself my own strengths and weaknesses when it came to creative work was definitely like one of the most powerful things that I did for myself when I was a manager. And it's kind of a fun story, I think. Back when I was at Verve, someone asked me how good I was at predicting the success of our campaigns. And I'm embarrassed to say my initial response was, I'm good. I'm very good at this. And but then something kind of sparked in the back of my head, and I was like, wait a minute, am I actually good? Like, what proof do I have of this? I don't know. So I decided to find out. And for close to a full year, I made predictions about the levels of success of each campaign ahead of launch. My team, I should say, at the time were not aware that I did this. I told them about it afterwards, and I shared the results with them afterwards. And the results were really eye-opening. I really wasn't very good at predicting success at all, and certainly like much worse than I thought I was. But I learned tons as a result, and it allowed me. Well, I mean, like, so there were a few things that I learned in particular. So one of the things, like, I suspected was that possibly I had a tendency to fall in love with my own ideas, which is pretty common, right? If it's your idea, you're a bit closer to it. Perhaps you fall in love a little bit and you have unrealistic expectations of the likelihood of success. What was super interesting was actually apparently I don't do that. I'm actually pretty good at judging the likely success of campaigns that were my ideas, my own campaigns, and I don't seem to fall in love with them. My problem was falling in love with other people's ideas, which was not what I was expecting at all. And it was really good for me to know that and to recognize that, and it enabled me to change a bunch of stuff in terms of like our own processes, like our own validation processes, the ways in which we were selecting the ideas that made it to production, that kind of thing. It allowed us to change a bunch of stuff for the better as a result. So yeah, I recommend every manager does this, even though it was honestly, I was pretty shocked at how bad I was. But yeah, fun, I think. Fun thing to do, possibly.
So I have a bunch of notes that I took during that, and thank you for sharing all that information. That's a lot of good stuff there. I want to take a step back though, because you position yourself as a creative content consultant, and you talked about, creative and creativity quite a bit. What is creative content? Like how is creative content different from perhaps, I mean, is there uncreative content out there as well?
That's a great question. For the record, no, I don't think there's uncreative content. It's possibly you're right though. It's possibly a confusing label for sure. I guess part of the reason I label myself or call myself a creative content consultant is because a lot of my work involves training people kind of how to be more creative. So creativity is kind of at the heart of a lot of the work that I do with my clients. And I guess I probably labeled it like that to differentiate it from other sorts of content disciplines. So for example, as I mentioned before, the content that I do the most work on, or the type of content I do the most work on, is content which exists to get links and coverage from journalists. And I guess I use creative to differentiate from perhaps other sorts of content. So we, as an industry, for example, we produce content that's designed to rank. Now, content that's designed to rank well organically, I'm sure it's creative. I'm sure it necessarily needs to be creative in a variety of ways, but it's kind of technically led, and I do it really to kind of I guess differentiate myself from that more technical content discipline. I think another core content discipline, I guess, is like content which exists to convert customers. So there are a bunch of excellent conversion rate optimization specialists out there, and I'm not one of them. So I wanted, I wanted to try and avoid confusion where I could. Labels change throughout time. Like even in the time that I've been working in this industry, like what I've done has been called different things. So kind of way back in, I don't know, 2009, 2010, even 2011, they used to call it link bait. What we did, they used to call it link bait. Then they called it content marketing, which was super confusing because content marketing is much, much bigger than the particular type of content that I most frequently make. Now I feel like we're calling it digital PR, and that's cool. I'm really relaxed about what we call these things. But yeah, it's a great question. No, in no way, shape or form am I suggesting that there is uncreative content out there.
Well, I'll tell you, it depends upon the types of companies you work with. You have a great background. You've worked for some great agencies. You've worked with some great companies. We have all seen content that has been produced typically solely for ranking, and you can see it right off the bat. You can see that the writer, they're trying to reverse engineer what is currently ranking, and there's no voice. There's no voice of the brand. There's no differentiation in it. It is purely a technical piece of content with the intent to rank. And I would suggest, and I don't know your thoughts on this, but those are just not ranking. If you're not putting anything of your own into that content to truly make it your own, it is just not performing as well these days, at least in competitive types of situations. Like, you have to have creativity, even when it comes to, that standard piece of content that people are writing with the intent to rank a website. But still, more often than not, I'm seeing content that it really does lack the creativity that I think you're suggesting. So, and I don't know your experience, with that type of content, but you just read it and just shake your head. Like, there's just,
Yeah.
But it also gets back to this: get there faster, get where faster, right? Produce content faster to get to your goals faster. I think those are competing with one another.
Yeah, they definitely are. And to your point, I've definitely seen the sort of content that you mean. And I'm, I'm relieved it's less effective than it once was. Because I do feel that, that was really, in a bunch of ways, like it was a race to the bottom, right? It wasn't content that was really created with a user in mind so much as created with a search engine in mind. And it's entirely possible to serve both, I think. The other thing that you sort of touched on, which I'd also concur with, is the notion of really derivative content. So this reverse engineering leading to an awful lot of homogenous content essentially, where an awful lot of websites have effectively recreated the same article, but it doesn't necessarily answer the question perhaps that the user really has, or perhaps it doesn't differentiate this company from another, or there's just there's no kind of cohesive view on what somebody should do next after they read that content. So there's definitely there's definitely been a case that I think in the past of, I feel like people used to call it SEO content, in inverted commas, SEO content. And it always gave me shivers. And I think it gave the SEO industry, our industry, a really bad name. Because, that wasn't really what the majority of us were advocating for, or indeed producing. But I think that a lot of content like that was being produced at a certain point, and worse, it seemed to be working. So.
And it's still being produced. It's just not working as well as it used to, fortunately. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the skill, not the talent, but the skill of creativity. So from a management perspective, what are some things that you can do to help build creativity in your team, or help your team develop that skill?
Yeah, brilliant question. I love that question. So I think there's a couple of things certainly that I looked to put in place. First and foremost, I did a bunch of work around just demystifying what creativity is. So I think that lots of people think that to come up with ideas, you get a pen and you get a blank piece of paper and the ideas just come. And in my experience, normally it doesn't work like that. So I kind of talk about the creative process in 3 stages. You have inspiration. So that's where you're collecting things which either you love or you think are interesting. Most of the time I encourage people to do this with a particular client in mind. So when I was at Verve, typically when we got a new client, the first question of that client would be, where do you want coverage? And we would ask them for 5 to 10 sites where they'd love to get coverage. And the first thing we do is go and gather some inspiration. And that really looked like trawling those sites to see what the journalists there were already writing about, which we thought was interesting and or cool, and that we felt were spaces we could legitimately play in with this client. So yeah, first bit, get yourself a whole load of inspiration, a glorious file of things that you think are interesting and inspiring, and spark something in you. I often talk about paying attention to your own feelings when you're looking for inspirational content. And I've definitely, for me personally, what I'm kind of looking for is something that makes me go, wait, what? Why? And it sparks curiosity, and I want to find out more. That's normally like a good indicator in terms of feelings. So we've got inspiration. Then we've got generation. So you can't come up with ideas without inspiration. So you have to do the inspiration bit first, right? Then you take all these things that inspire you, and you start generating some ideas. So it's only at this point that you start trying to come up with a few ideas. And obviously at this stage, I think the important piece of the puzzle is to generate lots of ideas and not to worry too much at this point about whether or not any of them are possible. Worry about whether or not it's possible later. The final stage is then validation. And validation is when you are looking at like, which of these ideas are possible? If this precise idea isn't possible, but we think it's super interesting, how can we modify it into something that we could do? Like what, for example, if it's a data piece, what data is available? Like what stories can we tell from that? Also in the validation process, we'll also be looking again to make sure like what's out there already on this topic. Again, we'll revisit the topic again to make sure that like, say someone else hasn't just done a really brilliant piece about this and our piece would be worse. That would not be a cool thing for us to produce. Also, again, just to check our assumptions about what journalists are really writing about and whether or not this really fits the bill. And I guess like the final piece of the puzzle for validation is really thinking around like, is this right for the client? Is this a good client fit? So there's the process bit, and demystifying the process really helps. And I think that you can then begin to like work with individual members of the team on the bits that they find hardest. And I think a lot of the time this is about really working out at what points are people happiest working on their own, and when do they benefit from interaction and team. And this really comes down to the individual. Like, I am a really solitary worker. I do the whole thing on my own, pretty much. So inspiration alone, generation alone, and validation alone, and then I'll seek some feedback. But there are lots of people out there who actually, like, they can't generate ideas on their own. They need other people to bounce off. And if you force them or try to force them to generate ideas on their own, they will become really, really stuck and really, really unhappy. So you have to kind of account for, different people's ways of working. And so for a person like me, a brainstorm is my idea of hell. Like, I don't want to come to your brainstorm ever. Like, thank you for the invite, I appreciate it, but I will never want to come. But for other people, that's the thing they need in order to be able to generate those ideas and then go away and do some more work solo. So there's definitely like a bunch of stuff, I guess, like around creativity, the process, and creating an environment. Ultimately, you need to create a safe space where people are comfortable telling you their ideas, because no matter which way you twist or turn it, like, this stuff is personal. Like, you come up with an idea, you are personally attached to it, almost by design. You will have some degree of attachment to it, and it can feel very vulnerable telling other people your ideas. So you kind of I definitely believe in trying to create a safe space where people feel okay to tell you their ideas, and also where they feel okay to to critique and feedback on other people's ideas. Because if everyone's too nice, actually you won't get the best creative work. I'm not a person that believes, like, another myth which I really strongly dislike is that, great creative work comes from conflict. And I'm like, no, it doesn't. Like, you can behave you can create a supportive and nurturing environment which is relatively conflict free. Like, people shouldn't be fighting each other all the time, or you don't want to be creating a work environment where everyone's miserable, right? Like, that sounds awful to me.
Well, the word conflict is interesting, because I was thinking of that word when you were describing the creative process. So you were talking about, you didn't say Gantt chart, but you were talking essentially about Gantt charts earlier, and trying to show people, how different, subtasks within an overall task overlap, and dependencies and things such as that. And you just talked about creating a process in general to allow people to be creative. And the conflict for me comes in what you also said, the flexibility that you need to allow the individuals. So you're developing a formal process for the company that also allows for the flexibility of your creative team to be their best. So within that process, that flexibility exists. For instance, that person that wants to work solo, or that person that wants to. So if you really pigeonhole people into this is exactly how the process has to be done, then you run into the issue of having them do suboptimal work. But if you don't have a process at all, then you're going to have challenges, getting there faster. And I don't know if I said that all correctly, but it does seem like there's some convergence there, and trying to find the right balance between that formal process and allowing for that individual creativity.
Sure. I mean, and I think for clarity, like, for me, it was less about setting out a formal process and more about sharing my own process. So I think that the way that I talk about creativity as being like these three elements, like inspiration, generation, validation, I do believe strongly that you need to do the inspiration bit first. But thereafter, like you can ping pong around within that. So certainly, like for me personally, I might just do inspiration, just look for inspirational stuff on a given day, and then I'll generate like, I don't know, 50 ideas, but not validate any of them. Sometimes I'll generate one idea or come up with one idea and need to shoot straight back to get more inspiration, because I've kind of gone off on a bit of a tangent, and I'm like, I really like this idea, but I don't know this space well enough. So I go back to look for more inspiration at that point. And I think certainly I have found it useful to share my own creative process with other people. But ultimately, what I'm seeking to do is to encourage them to find a process that works for them. So some of the stuff that I do may be really, really useful to them, and giving them a framework, I definitely think helps early doors. But yeah, I'm not sure that it's optimal to be too rigid with this stuff.
How do you balance that with, deadlines and other expectations that the company and management has?
I mean, I think I am a pretty hands-off manager, which I think helps. I think if you're by nature a micromanager, then managing a creative team will be problematic for you, honestly. So actually being kind of hands-off, I think helps. So I would, like, my view was always very much like, you give people the tools, you talk them through how you do a thing, you encourage them to continually work and improve. But other than that, you give them a brief and you give them a deadline, and you're very clear about what you expect, and you expect them to deliver, but you let them get there however they get there, as long as they deliver what it is, whatever it is that you've agreed you're looking for. And of course, with creative work, like, deadlines are super tricky, because you have a deadline to pitch a client ideas, right? You have to take ideas to them. Ultimately, I mean, you might be able to put off a meeting once, and it might be the right call. Like, if you really, if you get to that point and you're like, we really don't have, the ideas that we have really aren't good enough, we probably shouldn't pitch these. You can maybe cancel that meeting once, but you can't go on cancelling it indefinitely. And so I think that, there is one of the toughest things about creative work, and I do think one of the reasons why people do get burned out is because sometimes it does go wrong, and you do have to essentially, like, pick up the work yourself. So I definitely had late nights and weekend work trying to fix up a pitch deck for a client, and I'm sure that everyone who does this sort of work has suffered similar fates. I think what's important is, as far as possible, that you don't, that doesn't become the norm, right? Like, you put this stuff in place and you encourage people to be accountable for their own work, and you don't just rely on a few key players to work late nights and to work weekends to get you what you need. But it is hard. There's naturally conflict there, and yes, the creative process can often take longer than the time that you have allowed.
So then let's talk briefly about predictions, because this was a point that you made, that you thought this would be a helpful experience for managers to go through. Let's talk a little bit about that. First of all, what are they predicting? Like, what is that? Is there a particular KPI or goal, or and again, that could vary from company to company based upon their objectives. But tell us a little bit about that process, generally speaking, that a manager listening to this can take and run with?
Sure. So obviously, as mentioned before, most of the creative teams that I work with are working in the digital PR space. So they will be producing campaigns for clients. Those campaigns, their express purpose is to get linked coverage from journalists. So therefore, making a prediction about the number of links that a piece will achieve, I think is a reasonable predictor or a reasonable KPI in this instance. Excuse me. The way that I did that for my own predictions was basically I did it on a scale. So this piece will get 0 to 10 links, this piece will get 11 to 20 links, and so on and so forth. Because it's not necessarily like a binary like succeed fail. What I was looking to see was how accurate I was able to predict those things. And so if somebody was working in a similar industry to me, that is what I would suggest they do. But I think you can easily convert this into like any content with any KPI, because certainly in my experience at least, every type of content has specific KPIs, and if it doesn't, then why are you making it? And how will you know if it's a success or not? So I think that you just convert the process to whatever makes sense in terms of KPIs for the content that you're creating, and see. And
how did you use this information to better yourself, become a better manager, a better content marketer?
Sure.
What did you do with it?
So I looked at it and I cut the data a bunch of ways. I looked to see, so one of the splits I did was, like I say, my own ideas versus other people's ideas. And I was much better in terms of accuracy at predicting the success of my own ideas. So I was very clear-headed about that, which surprised me. I thought I would be worse at that. And I suspect actually, if I'd done this experiment earlier in my career, I almost certainly would not have been so clear-headed about my own ideas. So that was really interesting. So one of the ways I cut it was my idea, not my idea. The other way I cut it was I basically split the campaigns into like performance brackets. So how good was I at predicting the most successful campaigns? So basically, like, can I spot a winner? Question, like, can I spot a winner? My thought being was like, if I can spot a winner, that's possibly the most, that's possibly more important. Again, it was kind of patchy there. Better. It could have been worse, but it wasn't that great. It wasn't that great there. And then the other piece of the puzzle, which I found super interesting, was I also split the campaigns into whether or not I loved them, which sounds like a weird thing. So when I'm predicting the success of a campaign, I'm doing it in quite like a cold, calculating way. I'm actually just asking myself, to what extent do I think this campaign is going to be successful? When I'm asking myself whether or not I personally love the campaign, that's literally a value judgment. Like, is it something that personally speaks to me? And as I mentioned before, the campaigns which I loved, which were not mine, if this makes sense, those were where I fell down the most frequently, falling in love with other people's ideas. That kind of definitely clouded my judgment. And in terms of like the things I guess it taught me, some of it, like, I was kind of lucky from the outset in that I had built a team that I really, really trusted and respected, and they were a team that weren't frightened to challenge me. And tell me when they didn't agree. And so, like, I was super grateful that I listened to them. So there was one campaign in particular which I just wasn't convinced was going to work at all. And I was this ready to scrap it. Like I was like, let's not launch it. Let's not do it. And I had a meeting with a couple of people on the team, and they were like, you know what? Like, actually, we think this is going to, like, we really think this is going to work. And here are all the stories we think we can tell, and here's where we can sell this in. And I'm really, really glad that I was like, okay, cool, do it then. We'll launch it. If you're confident, we'll launch it. I'm really, really grateful that I did allow them to talk me around, because obviously, like, if I hadn't, like, that would have been a great campaign that we'd have missed out on. But it definitely taught me, I guess, like, it taught me some of the value of that. And it also taught me stuff around, like, I guess, like, where my own biases were. So the next time somebody suggested an idea, which was about, say, a particular topic that I'm very passionate about, I kind of remembered, oh, okay, like, you've got a bit of a positive bias here. Like, you love this, so you love this topic, you're passionate about this topic, so you think we should definitely make it. Here in particular, you need to listen more carefully to what other people are saying, because your opinion here is clouded. Like, your judgment here is not good. So listen harder to other people here. And so stuff like that, I think, was really, really valuable.
Oh, that's great. Very insightful. Any tips or ideas that you want to share before we wrap this up? Anything that you haven't spoken about yet?
I guess, like, it's a more general tip, but certainly, again, something. I guess it's a point where I really fell down initially when I was first managing my team. I think I thought that. I think I had some skewed ideas about what a manager was ultimately. So I think I thought that all the answers had to come from me. And actually, I quickly discovered that the best answers always came from the team. And actually, talking to them openly about, okay, so we've been challenged with this, right? We need to get there faster. What do you think we could do to try and get there? So whereas I think like my instinct was that I had to come up with a solution and then present it to the team, somehow sell it to the team, but actually involving them in that process, going like, look, here's the challenge. I've got a few ideas, but I want to hear your ideas. Tell me some of the things you think that we can try to help us get there faster, produce campaigns faster. And that was really, really powerful. Like, the realization that I didn't have to have all the answers was weirdly empowering. And obviously, when a team comes up with solutions together, you then don't have that sell-in problem because it's come from them. So I guess it's possibly like a more general management tip, but that was definitely a really valuable lesson that kind of I learned there.
And that gets back to what type of manager will thrive in a content marketing role, right? And at least in that example, if you were a micromanager, you're going to have some real challenges doing that. And I can see working with a creative team that they may want, perhaps more so than other types of people, but they may want that input because that is part of their creative process as well. To be able to come to that decision and to be able to accept the collective decision, it is a process where they're exercising their creativity to get there.
Yeah, and actually, creative people are fantastic problem solvers. Mm-hmm. Like, we tend to have like quite a narrow view of what creative means, or like what a creative person is. But anybody who engages in any kind of problem-solving activity is necessarily creative. So it kind of follows to me that actually, if you want a solution to a problem, hitting up a bunch of creative people is like a pretty good idea. Like, they'll probably come up with some stuff that you hadn't thought about before, and that's almost certainly worth like testing out, trying to see if it works. So yeah,
very nice. Thank you. My last question here before we wrap up then. anything that you're super excited about in the industry, professionally, going forward?
Sure. Selfishly, I was going to talk a bit about a pet project which I have, which I'm really, really enjoying. So I send out a fortnightly newsletter. It's called Manufacturing Serendipity, and it's not strictly work related, although it is creativity related. It basically contains a bunch of wonderful things that I've come across both online and off in that 2-week period. There's also book and TV and film recommendations, like other stuff I'm up to, stuff I think is cool. And it's effectively like becoming a repository of interesting things. And I've been really, really enjoying doing it. And people seem to like it, which is also fun for me. If you're interested, you can sign up at wordrist.com/newsletter.
And it's Wordrist, WORDERIST.com.
Yeah.
Perfect. And I'll do a link as well when I post this. So, and one thing that I'm excited about is August 26th, we're having an event, a virtual event called the Business of Content, where Hannah will be presenting on this subject matter of how to build high performance content teams. That's not your exact title, but generally speaking, what you'll be talking about. We'll be joined with, I think it's 11 other amazing marketers, both from agencies and consultancies and companies themselves, to sign up for that event. It's the businessofcontent.events. Tickets are free for the first 1,000, but that's quickly disappearing. So go sign up. If you're listening or watching this after August 26th, you can still go to that website and we'll have recorded videos there as well. So I'm excited for that, and I appreciate your time here, Hannah, and I look forward to hearing your presentation on the 26th. And with that, I'll say thank you and bye. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks very much for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. Take care.
You've been listening to The Business of Content. If you're a decision maker in your organization or growing companies, we hope you've gotten some useful and practical information from the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at thebusinessofcontent.fm. That's thebusinessofcontent.fm. And for more where content marketing meets finance and operations, go to www.contentramp.com. Till next time, this is The Business of Content.